Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we will continue with the tale of Feraydun and his three sons, and begin the section on the vengeance of Manucheh. Now, Mahafarid gave birth to a splendid child, one worthy of the crown and the throne. As soon as the boy had been born, a servant took him to Feraydun and said, "Good news, your majesty! Look, here is Iraj." The king laughed, since it was indeed as if Iraj were alive again. He took the child in his arms and prayed to God, "May this day be remembered as auspicious, and may our enemies' hearts be defeated." Then he looked down at the child's face again and said, "Sprung from a pure mother and father, a noble branch has borne fruit. Wine has been poured from a splendid goblet. He has a clear, open face, and may his name be Manucheh." Feraydun had the child brought up so attentively that the winds of heaven never touched him. The nurse who cared for him did not walk on the earth. Her feet trod on musk, and a silk parasol shaded her head. Throughout his childhood no harm came to Manucheh from the stars. Feraydun had taught him the arts of kingship, and his heart revived as Manucheh grew. The army too favored the young man, and the king gave him a golden throne, a heavy mace, and a turquoise-studded crown. Then he handed over to him the keys of all his treasuries, as well as his royal enclosure made of brocade and various colors, within which were tents of leopard skin. He freely gave him Arab horses with golden bridles, Indian swords and golden scabbards, armor and helmets, bows from chachi, arrows of poplar wood, javelins and Chinese shields. He loved him so much that he thought it appropriate to give all these treasures accumulated with such toil to Manucheh. Then he ordered the champions of the army and the country's nobles to come before him, to acclaim the young man as king and to sprinkle emeralds over his crown. Great festivities were held, and it became clear who were wolves and who were sheep. Kareen of the Karavani clan was there, as well as Shahrui, the army commander, and Ondoan, the armies assembled, and Manucheh dominated them as his flock. News from the imperial crown shone once more came to Son and Tur. Their unjust hearts feared the stars were turning against them. The evildoers' days were darkened, and they took counsel together. They agreed they had to seek a remedy for their situation, and the only thing they could think of was to send someone to Feraydun, apologizing for their past behavior. They sought out an envoy who would be able to speak well and sincerely, and spoke flattering to him. Then, in fear of what fate would bring them, they opened the treasury of the West and chose from this ancient store a golden crown. They had elephants richly carrying and filled chariots with musk and ambergris, gold and silver coins, silks and furs, and when all this had been made ready, the envoy presented himself before them, prepared for the journey. They gave him a message to give Feraydun, beginning with praise of God and invoking blessings on Feraydun, wishing him long life, health, and glory. Then they told him to say, "The eyes of these two sinners are filled with tears of shame before their father. Their hearts burn with regret, and they beg for forgiveness. Wise men say that a man is punished for his sins, that he suffers and his heart is filled with anguish. And they say to the king that their hearts are tormented in this way. But these things were written in our fates. They say, and our actions have done no more than bring what was written to pass. Even lions that terrify the world and dragons cannot escape the snare of fate." And then an evil and audacious demon emptied our hearts of all fear of God and made our minds his dwelling place. But we hope that the king will pardon us, even though our sins are great, that he will put it down to our ignorance, to the workings of the heavens, which now save us and now destroy us, and thirdly to the demon, who scurries around the world and is ready for every mischief. If the king will not look for revenge against us, our ways will be purified. Let him send Manucheh to us, his suppliants, with a mighty army, so that we may present ourselves before him on foot, and as his slaves. May we wash away with our eyes' tears the tree of vengeance that has grown from all hatred. As the crown is renewed, we hasten to offer our tears and sufferings, and we send treasure as an earnest of our good faith. His heart was filled with words that had neither rhyme nor reason to them, accompanied by elephants and a treasure. The envoy came in splendor in the court. Now, when Feraydun heard of his approach, he had the imperial throne draped in Chinese brocade, and Kynid crown was made ready. He sat on the turquoise-studded throne, like a cypress, topped by a full moon, wearing the crown, the royal earrings, and torque as befits a king. Prince Manucheh sat beside him wearing the royal diadem, and the country's nobles stood ranged on each side, dressed in gold from head to foot, bearing gold maces and shields. Wild animals were tethered there with golden chains and collars. On the one side, lions and leopards, and on the other side, war elephants. The warrior Shapir left the castle to welcome Son's messenger, who dismounted and ran toward the doorway. When he approached King Feraydun and saw him crowned high on his throne, he bowed his head and placed his face against the ground. The king motioned him to place on the golden throne, and the messenger began his speech. Great king, ornament of the crown, the throne, and royal seal, whose throne transforms the world into a rose garden, and whose good fortune illumes the air. We are all slaves of the dust beneath your feet, and live only for you. The king smiled on him and made him welcome, and the envoy repeated Son and Tur's message that disguised truth with lies. The king listened to his fluent talk, asking pardon for the two brothers, and suggesting that Manucheh visit them, when as his slaves they would welcome him and transfer to him their crowns and thrones, paying the blood price they owed their father with silks and gold, crowns and royal belts. The envoy spoke, and the king listened, and his answer was as a key that opens a lock. When the world's king had heard his evil son's message, he answered the envoy point by point. He said, "How can you hide the sun? The hidden works of their evil hearts are clearer than the sun in the heavens. I've heard all you said, and now pay attention to my answer. Tell these fearless, shameless, unjust, malevolent wretches that idle talk counts for nothing, and I will not indulge in it. If they feel such love for Manucheh now, where is Iraj's body? It has been devoured by wild beasts, and his head was cut off and sent to me in a coffin. And now you're finished with Iraj, you wish to start on Manucheh? You will only see him accompanied by an army, with an iron helmet on his head, bearing a mace and the Kaviani banner, the golden ground blackened by his horse's hooves. He will have the commander Karen with him, and Shupir and Nastor will command the rear of his army. Sarv, the king of the Yemen, will be there in the vanguard to advise him. We look to wash the leaves and fruits of the tree of vengeance for Iraj and blood. Previously, we did not seek vengeance for him because we did not think the times were propitious. It would not have been suitable for me to fight against my two sons. But now that a noble branch has sprung from the tree, that his enemies uprooted, you will find that a savage lion longs for vengeance for his grandfather's death, and that he comes with our champions, Sam, the son of Narman, and Karshap, who is descended from Jarmshid, that their army stretches from one mountain to the other and pounds the earth beneath its feet. As for their demand that the king should wash all thoughts of revenge from his heart and forgive them, because this was the doing of heavens, because their wisdom was clouded and their love overshadowed, I have heard all these futile excuses, and respond with the saying of a wise man: the man who sows the seeds of evil never sees one happy day or the joys of paradise. If God has forgiven you, Why are you so afraid of your brother's blood? Have you no shame before God with your black hearts and your tongues filled with lying words? You will be punished for this evil in both worlds. This act will not remain hidden. And then this sending an ivory throne, war elephants, and a turquoise-studded crown is supposed to make me give up my longing for revenge? I'm to sell princes' lives for gold? I'd rather my throne, crown, and glory were destroyed than to do such a thing. Perhaps some dragon's spawn would accept a price for a priceless life. But who says that an aged father would do such a thing for his son's life? I've no need of this wealth you've sent, and there is no point in my talking any more on the subject. This father will never cease to long for vengeance when he lives. I've heard your message. Hear my answer. Then to the envoy he said, spell this out to them, sentence by sentence. Now go. The envoy heard these terrifying words and observed Manucheh seated on the throne. He withered away in fear and rose trembling from his seat. Then and there he sat in the saddle to depart. This noble young man saw in his soul all that was destined to happen, and that it would not be long before the heavens frowned on Tur and Salm. He sped like the wind, his head filled with the king's answers, his heart with foreboding. When he reached the west, he saw a silken tent pitched on the plain where the two kings waited for him. They made a space for him to sit and asked about the new king. They questioned the envoy concerning the crown and the imperial throne, King Feraydun and his army, the assembled warriors, and the state of the country. And then they wanted to know how the turning heavens had favored Manucheh, who among the nobility was there, who the vizier was, the state of the treasury, and who the treasury was, how many cavalries were assembled there, who their leader was, and who the army commanders were. The envoy said, let the man who has never seen the glories of spring see Feraydun's court. It is a place of spring-like joy. A heaven of the dust there is ambergris, the earth is gold. The heavens smile down on the palace. No mountain is as tall, nor garden as vast. As I approached, the palace summit seemed hidden among the stars. There are elephants tethered on one side, lions on the others, and all the world bows before his good fortune. His elephants bear golden howdahs. His lions' collars are studded with jewels. Drummers stand before the elephants, and the blare of brazen trumpets sounds from every side. The world seems to seethe, and the earth roar to the heavens. I entered the court and saw a man, a king, as radiant as the moon, seated on a turquoise-studded throne, his crown surmounted by shining rubies. His head was as white as camphor, his cheeks like rose petals. His heart seeks peace, and the words are kindly. The words hope and fear are in his hands. And you would say that Jamshid lives again in him? On his right sat Manucheh, as tall and elegant as a cypress tree, as kingly in his heart and language as Tammuz, the binder of demons. The warrior Kerin stood before him, and to his left Sarv, the king of Yemen. Sarv is his vizier. Victorious Karshasp is his treasurer, and no one has ever seen such wealth as in his treasury. Two ranks of warriors line the palace walls, bearing golden maces, and with golden diadems. Karin, Ondoan, Shari, the destroyer of lions, and Shapir, who is like war elephant in his rage, are his commanders. The air is darkened with the war drum sound from their elephants' backs, and if they attack us, our mountains will be flattened like a plain, our plains encumbered like mountains. Their hearts are filled with hatred, their faces with frowns, and war is their one desire. He told them all he had seen, and the words he had heard from Feraydun. The hearts of the two criminals writhed in anguish, and their faces darkened. They sat and looked for some remedy, but their words had neither head nor tail to them. Then Tur said to Salm, "We must forget about peace and tranquility. The lion cub must not sharpen his teeth and become brave. How can he be devoid of talents when his teacher is Feraydun? When grandfather and grandson conspire, something extraordinary will come of it. We must prepare for war and make up for lost time." They gathered forces from China and the West and led their cavalry out. The world was filled with rumors, and men flocked to their banners. But though their armies were limitless, their stars were already declining. The two armies made for Iran. Their soldiers were hidden in helmets and armors and war elephants, and wealth accompanied the murderous brothers, whose hearts were bent on destruction. Feraydun received news that their forces were nearing Persia and ordered Manucheh to lead his army out to the plain. He said, "A young man of good fortune wins the day by patience. Wisdom will entrap his prey. He lets the leopard follows him to where he has already laid his cunning snare." Manucheh replied, "Good king, fortune has frowned on whoever opposes you with hatred in his heart, and his body and soul will soon be severed from one another. I have bound on my armor for battle, and I shall not loosen its knots until the battlefield's dust has obscured the sun. I have contempt for all of their warriors, and how can they dare to fight against me?" He ordered Corinne to lead their troops out. The king's pavilion was pitched on the plain, with the royal banner fluttering in the front. The warriors advanced in companies, and the plains and mountains were like heaving waves of the sea. The dust obscured the sun and darkened the bright day. Deafening war cries went up from every side. The Arab horses neighed, and the war drums resounded. For 2 miles elephants were drawn up before the camp. 60 of them bore golden howdahs studded with jewels. 300 were loaded with baggage. 300 were covered in iron armor with only their eyes visible. The king's tent was struck, and the army marched out from Tamasheh. 300,000 armored cavalry, led by the warlike Corinne, each of them like a raging lion and eager to avenge the death of Irash, followed by the Kavani banner, their swords glittering in their fists. Manucheh and Corinne emerged from the forest of Narvan to lead the army into the open plain. The prince placed Karshap in command of the left flank. Sam and Kobad had charge of the right. Outshining all others, Manucheh, accompanied by Sarv, was as splendid as the full moon in the center of his forces. Corinne and Sam drew their swords with their scabbards. Kobad led the advanced troops, and men from the clan of Talaman lay hidden to ambush the enemy. The army, with its lion warriors and resounding drums, was as splendid as a bride in all her finery. Salm and Tur learned that an army intent on revenge was preparing for war. The two brothers led their troops out from among the trees, and the blood from their livers appeared as foam on their lips. The murderers advanced their troops, their minds filled with hatred. Behind them lay a sea and the territory of the Alans. Kobad came forward to spy out the land, and when Tur heard of this, he rushed forward like the wind and said to him, "Go back to Manucheh and say, 'And who bestowed this armor and this sword on you? You have no father from Iraj race. A girl was born. So who gave you the mace?' That signifies the royal sovereignty. Young king, who gave you this authority?" Kobad answered, "Don't worry. I'll take your message exactly as you've said it. But if you reflected on this long and wisely, you know this is a terrifying business you've embarked on, and you'd be afraid to say these foolish words of yours. Don't be surprised if the wild animals weep for the day and night, because from the forest of Narvan to China the land is filled with our horsemen and warriors, flourishing their swords, and when they see the Kavani banner, your heart and brain will split with terror when you see them, and you will know the peaks of this land from its valleys. Kobad went to the king and told him what he had heard from Tur. Manucheh laughed and said, "No one but a fool would say such things. Thanks be to God of this world and the next, who knows what is plain and what is hidden, and who is aware that Iraj is my grandfather, and that the great Feraydun is my witness in this. When I fight, my lineage will be plain enough. I swear by the might of the god of the sun and the moon that I will not let Tur rule for long. In that blinking of an eye, I shall display his severed head before the army. I shall have my revenge for Iraj's death, and trample Tur's reign beneath my feet." Manucheh gave orders, and that the tables be made ready for a feast, and that a place be set aside for wine and music. As darkness fell, he sent out sentries into the plain. Karin stood before the troops with Sarv, the king of the Yemen, and addressed them. "Nobles and lions loyal to the king, know that this war is against Ahriman. Keep yourself ready, and live in the knowledge of God's protection. Whoever is killed in this battle will be received into paradise, and his sins will be washed away. Whoever spills the blood of these warriors from China and the West and seizes their territory, his name will live forever, and he will earn the glorious praises of our priests. He will be given a diadem and throne from our king, who is the Lord of strength and the dispenser of justice. When day dawns and 2 watches of the morning have passed, prepare to fight. Ready your maces and kobali daggers. Keep to your ranks, and see that none advances his feet before the others." The commanders ranged themselves before the king and said with one voice, "We are your slaves, and live in this world only for the king. Whatever he orders, we shall do immediately. For him, we shall turn this plain to an oxus of blood." Then each man returned to his own tent, meditating on the battle to come. As dawn broke and darkness was dispelled, Manucheh rose up in the midst of his forces, dressed in his armor, wearing a Rumini helmet, and grasping his sword as one man. The troops thrust their lances into the air. They covered the face of the earth, their heads filled with fury, their foreheads with frowns. The king skillfully deployed the flanks and center of the army, and the ground seemed to heave like a floundering ship on the sea, or seethe like the waves of the Nile. The war drums on the elephants' backs were beaten. More drums were beaten before them, and the noise of trumpets resounded as if the battles were to be a festive celebration. The army moved forward like a mountain, and the 2 sides met in close combat. The plain became a sea of blood, as if red tulips had sprung up everywhere, and the elephants' legs glowed like pillars of coral. Into night came, and the sun disappeared. All the advantage was with Manucheh, because the world's soul loved him. Tur and Salm's hearts seethed with fury, and they plotted an ambush, so that when night turned to day, the 2 warriors held back, and none of their men advanced to battle. 1/2 of the day had passed, their hearts were filled with hatred, and they hatched one useless plot after another. They said, "When night comes, we'll ambush them and fill the mountains and plains with their blood." Night came, and day disappeared. Darkness covered all the earth, and the 2 unjust brothers readied their soldiers for a night attack. But Manucheh's spies had news of this and hurried to tell him what they had heard. Manucheh handed his men over to Karin, who took 3,000 brave warriors and hid them where they would be able to waylay the enemy. Tur set off with 100,000 troops in the darkness of the night, but as they neared the camp, they came on the Persian forces, drawn up behind the banner, ready for war. They had no choice but to attack, and the war cry went up from the midst. The sky was clouded by the cavalry's dust, and swords glittered in the dark like lightning. It was as if the air caught on fire, flashing with diamonds and burning the ground. The din of weapons deafened the fighters, and fire ascended into the heavens. The king lifted his head from where he had been lying in wait, and Tur had no means of escape. He tugged at his reins and turned to flee as his soldiers' cries echoed about him. Manucheh sped after him, and as he closed on him, flung a spear at his back. The sword dropped from Tur's hand, and Manucheh grasped him, lifting him from his saddle and hurling him to the ground. There and then he severed his head and left his body for the animals to devour. Then he returned to his own camp, his mind filled with the turning of fate which brought him prosperity and now defeat. Manucheh wrote a letter to King Feraydun telling him of how the battle had gone. He began by invoking God, the Lord of righteousness, purity, and justice, who is man's only protection against hardship, and called down his blessings on Feraydun, Lord of the crown and mace, to whom belong justice, faith, and glory, from whose good fortune all righteousness comes, and from whose throne all splendor and beauty emanate. He continued, I reached Tehran successfully, and we prepared our army for war. We fought 3 battles in 2 days, both at night and under the shining sun. They tried a night attack, but we were ready for them, because I had heard that they were going to attempt this trick as a last resort. We waylaid them, and I saw to it that their fists closed on nothing but air. As Tur retreated, I pursued him. I flung a spear at him which pierced his armor, and then, like the wind, I lifted him from his saddle. I hurled him to the ground, and as if he were a monster, I severed his head from his worthless body, and I sent you his head, as once sent that of Prince Iraj in a golden casket. And now I shall deal with Son. He sent a swift messenger with a letter, and when the man arrived, his face was filled with shame, his eyes with tears, since he wondered how he could show the severed head of the king of China to the Persian king, because no matter how evil a son might be, or how terrible his crimes, a father's heart would be wrung by such a sight. But he boldly came before the king, and set Tur's head before him. Feraydun called down blessings from the Lord of Justice on Manucheh. And this is where I end my tale for today, but I'll be back with more tomorrow.